I met Caleb at a networking mixer in Austin in early 2016, and honestly, I knew right away he was different from the usual crowd of tech bros and startup wannabes. He had this quiet confidence about him, dressed well without trying too hard. And when we talked about market trends and investment strategies, he actually knew what he was talking about. Most guys at these things are either trying way too hard to impress, or they're completely clueless about anything beyond their little bubble. Caleb was neither. He listened when I talked about my marketing work, asked thoughtful questions, and didn't immediately try to one-up me with his own stories. When he asked for my number at the end of the night, I actually felt excited instead of just politely interested. By our second month of dating, we were exclusive, and I remember feeling this deep satisfaction about how smoothly everything was progressing. While my friends were still dealing with guys who couldn't commit to weekend plans, let alone a relationship, I had found someone who actually wanted to build something real. Caleb would text me good morning every day, plan actual dates instead of just suggesting we hang out, and never made me wonder where I stood with him. When he suggested we make it official, I felt like I was winning at something my friends were still struggling with. Sarah was still getting ghosted by guys from dating apps, and here I was with someone who brought me flowers just because it was Tuesday. Moving in together after a year felt like the natural next step. Caleb had this beautiful apartment with actual adult furniture instead of the usual guy setup of a mattress on the floor and a gaming chair. I loved how he fell into this comfortable routine where he'd cook these elaborate meals he'd learned from cooking videos while I'd handle the wine selection and table setting. We'd watch documentaries instead of mindless TV, have actual conversations about our days instead of just scrolling through our phones. When my friends would come over, I could see them taking mental notes about how a real adult relationship was supposed to work. The way Caleb would bring me coffee in the morning without being asked, how he'd remember little things I mentioned wanting, how he never made me feel like I was asking for too much when I wanted to do couple things instead of just hanging out separately in the same room. The engagement happened on our second anniversary at the same restaurant where we'd had our first real date. Caleb had planned this whole thing where the waiter brought out dessert with the ring hidden inside, and even though I could tell he was nervous, he gave this sweet speech about how he'd known from our first conversation that I was someone he wanted to build a life with. When I said yes, I felt this rush of pure triumph, not just because I loved him, but because I had successfully navigated from single to engaged in 2 years flat, while most of my friends were still figuring out how to get guys to text them back consistently. The ring was exactly what I would have picked myself. The proposal was romantic without being over the top, and I couldn't wait to start planning a wedding that would show everyone what we'd built together. Our wedding 6 months later was everything I'd dreamed of. We had the ceremony outdoors at this gorgeous venue with string lights and perfect weather. And I swear, every photo looked like it belonged in a magazine. My dress was stunning. Caleb looked incredible in his suit. And when we said our vows, I felt like we were showing everyone what real love looked like. Both our families were there, all our friends, and I could tell people were genuinely moved by how perfect everything was. During our first dance, I remember looking around at everyone watching us and thinking that this was what I'd been working toward my whole adult life. Not just finding someone to marry, but finding someone worth marrying and building something beautiful together. The first few years of marriage were honestly wonderful. We traveled together, bought nice things for our home, hosted dinner parties where people would comment on how well we worked together. Caleb got promoted twice. I was doing well in my marketing role. And we had this life that felt like what adult relationships were supposed to look like. We'd talk about having kids someday, maybe buying a house. All these future plans that felt solid and real. I loved being married to him. Loved how other women would look at us when we were out together. Loved having someone who was genuinely proud to be with me. But somewhere around year 4, I started feeling restless. Not because anything was wrong exactly, but because everything felt so predictable. Caleb would come home. We'd have dinner, watch something on Netflix, go to bed, and repeat. He was still sweet and considerate, but there was no excitement anymore. No spark of unpredictability that made my heart race. When I joined the gym near our apartment, it was honestly just because I wanted something new in my routine, some way to feel energized again. That's where I met Carlos. He was 29, worked part-time as an instructor there, and had done some amateur MMA fighting before a shoulder injury ended that dream. When he offered to help me with my form on the machines, I was just being friendly. But there was this immediate chemistry that I hadn't felt in years. Carlos had this intensity about him, this way of focusing completely on whatever he was doing. Whether it was showing me how to adjust the weight settings or talking about his plans to open his own training facility someday. He made me feel like I was interesting again, like I had things to say that were worth hearing. Over the next few months, Carlos and I started talking more during my workouts. He'd tell me about places he'd traveled for fights, books he was reading about sports psychology, his theories about why most people never push themselves to their real potential. I found myself looking forward to the gym. In a way, I hadn't looked forward to anything in months. When Carlos suggested we grab coffee after one of my sessions to talk more about this nutrition plan, he thought would help me reach my fitness goals. It felt completely innocent. We were just friends. I was married. He knew that. And we were just two adults having interesting conversations. Except the conversations kept getting longer and more personal. Carlos would ask about my work, my goals, what I wanted out of life beyond just the day-to-day routine. When I mentioned feeling stuck sometimes, feeling like I was just going through the motions, he understood in a way that felt validating. He'd text me articles about things we'd discussed, funny memes that related to our conversations, little check-ins about how my day was going. It felt innocent because we weren't doing anything wrong, just talking, just being friends. But I started looking forward to those texts more than I looked forward to Caleb coming home. At the same time, Caleb and I had started having serious conversations about trying for kids. He was ready, had been ready for a while, and kept bringing up timelines and logistics in that methodical way of his. We'd look at our finances, talk about which bedroom would become the nursery, discuss how we'd handle childcare logistics. These were important conversations, and I participated fully, but something about the permanence of it all made me feel panicked in a way I couldn't explain to him. That's when I started researching different relationship models online. I read about couples who had successfully opened their marriages and found that it strengthened their bond instead of weakening it. The more I read, the more it made sense. Maybe what I was feeling wasn't a problem with our relationship, but just a natural human need for variety and excitement that most couples were too afraid to acknowledge. Maybe Caleb was feeling the same restlessness, but was just as afraid to bring it up as I had been. Maybe we could be mature enough to explore this together and come out stronger on the other side. I spent weeks thinking about how to bring it up. I didn't want to spring it on him randomly or make it sound like I was unhappy with our marriage. Because I wasn't. I loved Caleb, loved our life together, and wanted us to work. But I also wanted us to be honest about human nature and realistic about what we both might need to stay fulfilled long term. Other cultures normalize this kind of thing. Plenty of couples had found ways to acknowledge attraction to other people without it threatening their primary relationship. On a Thursday night in our 4th year of marriage, after Caleb had finished cleaning up from dinner and we were both relaxed and comfortable, I told him we needed to talk. I explained that I'd been thinking about our relationship and how we could make sure we stayed connected and excited about each other as we moved into the next phase of our lives. I told him I'd been reading about couples who had experimented with more open arrangements and found that it actually strengthened their emotional bond because they were being completely honest with each other instead of pretending they never found other people attractive. I was careful to explain that this would just be physical, just a way for us to explore and experience things together that would ultimately bring us closer. I used the word trial and exploration because I wanted him to understand this wasn't about replacing what we had, but about strengthening it. I told him about how other cultures normalize this kind of thing, how mature couples could handle this kind of honesty, how it was really just sex and wouldn't change our emotional connection at all. Caleb listened to everything I said, and then he said no, just like that. No discussion, no questions about what I meant or why I was bringing it up. Just no. When I tried to explain more, tried to get him to at least talk about it, he said no again. And then a third time, then he said I'm going to bed and walked away. I sat in that kitchen completely stunned. I had just tried to have the most mature, honest conversation possible about our relationship, and he couldn't even engage with it like an adult. He just shut down completely, like I'd suggested something completely insane instead of something that plenty of couples had successfully navigated. I'd spent weeks working up the courage to be vulnerable and honest with him, and he couldn't even be bothered to have a real conversation about it. The next morning, Caleb was completely silent. Not just quiet, but actually silent. He got up, got dressed, and started packing clothes into a bag without saying a single word to me. When I asked what he was doing, he didn't respond. When I tried to explain that I just wanted us to talk about possibilities, that I wasn't demanding anything, he acted like I wasn't even in the room. He packed enough stuff for several days and left without telling me where he was going. I found out later he went to his brother's place. I tried calling him, texting him, even called his brother to ask what was happening, but got nothing. Complete radio silence. Like I had done something unforgivable instead of just trying to be honest about what we might both need to stay happy together. I kept waiting for him to cool off and come home so we could actually discuss this, like adults, but the weekend passed without a word from him. By the following week, I was starting to panic. This wasn't just Caleb being moody or needing space. This was something else entirely. When he finally came back to the apartment, it was to pack more of his things. He moved through our home like I wasn't there, collecting his belongings with this methodical efficiency that made my stomach drop. When I tried to talk to him, tried to explain that I just wanted us to be able to discuss anything together, tried to apologize if I'd brought it up wrong, he continued to act like I was invisible. He took his clothes, his books, his laptop, some kitchen stuff he'd bought, but left me everything else. The furniture, the lease, all the shared things we'd accumulated. It was almost generous, except for the way he did it without acknowledging my existence. When he left that final time, I knew somehow that he wasn't coming back. But I couldn't understand how we'd gone from discussing our future family to him moving out over one conversation. That's when I threw myself into spending time with Carlos. If Caleb wanted to be dramatic and act like I'd committed some terrible crime by trying to be honest about human nature, then maybe I should actually explore what I'd been curious about. Carlos was sweet about the whole thing. He could tell I was going through something difficult. And he was there for me in a way that Caleb clearly wasn't going to be. We started seeing each other regularly. And for a while, it felt like validation that I'd been right about needing something more exciting in my life. But then the divorce papers arrived. Actual divorce papers. Like Caleb was seriously planning to end our marriage over one conversation where I'd tried to be mature and honest about what we both might need. I couldn't believe he was being this vindictive and dramatic. I was the one trying to strengthen our relationship by being real about human nature. And he was the one destroying it because he couldn't handle anything that challenged his fairy tale view of marriage. I wrote him a long letter explaining that I'd only been trying to be mature and thoughtful about our relationship. I told him I thought I was being progressive and honest, that I'd never meant to hurt him, that I just wanted us to be able to talk about anything together. I begged him to come home so we could work through this like adults. I poured my heart out on paper, explaining everything I'd been feeling and thinking, making it clear that our marriage was more important to me than anything else. He never responded. Not a text, not a call, not even an acknowledgement that he'd received it. Just continued silence, like I'd never mattered to him at all. When we finally went to court, I tried to explain to the judge that I just wanted to talk about options, that I'd been trying to be honest and communicative about our relationship. But Caleb's lawyer painted me as someone who demanded an open marriage and then acted surprised when there were consequences. The whole thing was humiliating, especially because Caleb sat there looking calm and reasonable while I was the one who looked emotional and unstable. The divorce was finalized, and I kept waiting for Caleb to reach out, to acknowledge that maybe he'd overreacted, that maybe we could at least talk about what had happened between us. But the silence continued. Complete no contact. Like our entire relationship had never existed. Meanwhile, my relationship with Carlos was falling apart. What had felt exciting and validating when I was angry at Caleb started feeling empty and pointless. Once I realized my marriage was actually over. Carlos was fun, but he wasn't building anything with me. He wasn't interested in a future together. Wasn't looking to replace what I'd lost with Caleb. When he started pulling back, started being less available, I realized I'd been just another woman he was casually seeing, while I'd thought we had something special. Then his ex-girlfriend Melissa reached out to me on Instagram to let me know that Carlos had been seeing multiple women the entire time. That I wasn't special to him at all. That he'd told her I was just some married woman going through a midlife crisis. The humiliation was overwhelming. I confronted Carlos at the gym, and he basically confirmed everything Melissa had said. When I started crying, started asking how he could have led me on like that. He acted like I was being dramatic and unreasonable. The gym manager asked me to leave, and when I kept trying to get Carlos to talk to me, they banned me permanently. 3 months after the divorce was final, I convinced some mutual friends to invite both Caleb and me to the same gathering, thinking that if we could just be in the same space, maybe we could start to heal what had been broken between us. But when Caleb saw me there, he left immediately, just turned around and walked out without saying a word to anyone, leaving me sitting there humiliated in front of people we'd both considered friends. I tried emailing him on his birthday, just a simple message wishing him well and sharing a memory from when we'd celebrated together. No response. I tried reaching out around our anniversary, thinking maybe he'd be feeling nostalgic too. Nothing. Every attempt at contact was met with complete silence, like I was a stranger who'd never been part of his life. 5 months ago, I ran into him at the grocery store. When I saw him in the produce section, my heart started racing, and I walked over to say hello. I told him he looked good, asked how he'd been, tried to make normal conversation like two adults who had shared 7 years of their lives together. He looked right through me, not like he was angry or hurt, but like I literally wasn't there, like I was invisible. He finished selecting his vegetables and walked away while I was mid-sentence, leaving me standing there talking to empty air. Now I'm living back at my mother's condo, the same place I used to make fun of because it's right next to the train tracks and the walls are thin. I maxed out 3 credit cards trying to maintain the lifestyle Caleb and I had built together, and I defaulted on the 3rd one when I got demoted at work for missing too many deadlines. I've been calling out sick more than I should, because some days I just can't face pretending everything is fine. I'm looking for part-time work to supplement my income. But everything feels pointless when the life I'd built has completely fallen apart. My coworkers whisper when they think I can't hear them. My friends have stopped inviting me to things because I had a breakdown at Sarah's birthday party last month when someone mentioned seeing Caleb around town. I got drunk at this rooftop bar downtown and started crying about how unfair everything was. And now people look at me like I'm someone to be pitied instead of someone worth knowing. The worst part is that I know Caleb is fine. More than fine. Probably he's got his job, his apartment, his life completely intact while everything I built has crumbled. He moved on like our relationship never mattered, like 7 years together meant nothing to him. Meanwhile, I can't even get through a grocery shopping trip without having a panic attack that he might be there. I tried posting about the situation online to get some perspective, but people were incredibly harsh, calling me names and acting like I was some kind of monster for trying to be honest about human nature. They acted like wanting to explore. Our relationship was the same as cheating. Like trying to strengthen our bond through honesty was somehow worse than all the couples who lie to each other and pretend they never find other people attractive. Everyone wants to make me the villain in this story. But I was the one trying to save our marriage by being real about what we both might need. I was the one brave enough to have difficult conversations instead of just letting resentment build up over years. I was trying to be mature and progressive, and everyone else is too close-minded to understand that. But sitting here in this condo with the trains rattling by every 20 minutes, listening to my mother ask when I'm going to get my life together, I can't help but wonder if maybe I should have just kept my mouth shut. Maybe I should have just been content with what we had instead of trying to make it better. Maybe some people really are too conventional to handle the kind of honesty I was offering. The thing is, I still love him. After everything that's happened, after all the silence and rejection and humiliation, I still miss what we had together. I miss our life, our routines, our plans for the future. I miss being part of something that felt permanent and real. And the worst part is knowing that he doesn't miss any of it, that he's probably grateful to be free of me and whatever complications I brought into his perfectly ordered life. Sometimes I catch myself drafting emails I'll never send, imagining conversations where I could make him understand what I was really trying to do. But I know now that he'll never respond, never give me the chance to explain, never acknowledge that what we had was worth fighting for. He made his decision that night in the kitchen, and apparently it was the easiest decision he ever made.